Alrighty, welcome everyone to another episode of Empower Speaks Healthcare Talks. As always, I'll give you some background information on what exactly this podcast is. So as the name suggests, the idea is to empower. And how do you empower? Through knowledge dissemination. So the whole idea is within the healthcare ecosystem is to invite variety of guests. We've had senior leadership from, various organizations, hospitals, you name it. We've had some entrepreneurs as well, and also patients. And we've kind of brought them to the table, kind of picked their brain to understand some of the challenges and the gaps that are presently in the healthcare ecosystem. So we can disseminate it, so it can empower you, so that you can better navigate the system or at least understand it as you go through it, whether it's for yourself or a loved one. Now, we haven't tapped into the consulting space, so we have a very special guest today, Dr. Shanil Ebrahim. He is a partner at Deloitte, and so he is by background an epidemiologist. So I'm going to, kind of hand it over to him to share a little bit about his story. But before I do that, I always share, how do I get this guest to come to the table and have these wonderful conversations with us? So it's kind of hard to believe. So on LinkedIn, I kind of came across, because he's done multiple podcasts, so definitely check it out because he's shared a lot of his knowledge. And I kind of listened to a couple of those and I was like, why not reach out to him and have him on the podcast? So believe it or not, I just cold messaged him on LinkedIn and kindly asked him if he would join us. And he said yes. And so we are here today. So for those of you, if you're always kind of afraid to reach out to someone, the worst can happen is someone will say no, or they may say yes. And I'm an example of that today. So that's how we kind of got our special guest today. So Shanil, I'm going to hand it over to you. If you could kindly walk us through your journey from being an epidemiologist to where you are today. So please take it away.
Thanks a bunch, and really appreciate you having me on. And happy to get into my career a little bit. So I actually started my career in healthcare long before AI was mainstream. And as you mentioned in my intro, I trained as a clinical epidemiologist, but I also trained as a bioethicist. And I spent years studying how evidence could improve decisions for both patients and policymakers. And back then, I worked across a few different countries. So I was working across a few different hospitals in Canada, specifically Mount Sinai, Sick Kids, and CAMH. Spent some time in the U.S. and also spent some time in Europe with Switzerland and Netherlands. And across all of these experiences, I was trying to answer one main question: how can we actually improve the lives of patients? How can we improve clinical care through evidence as well? But one of the things that I don't want to say frustrating, but I can't think of a better word right now, is after doing a lot of great research, a lot of them were quite slow to actually translate into clinical practice. And I mean, that's the, sometimes the drawbacks people say of research. It does take a pretty long time to translate into clinical practice. But that's actually what led me into consulting, first in independent consulting, then with a big consulting firm, because I realized that the issue wasn't a lack of data, it was the lack of translation. And we were just drowning in, a lot of information, but the insights were all there. So that kind of turned into a career at Deloitte, where I now spent the last 10 years, initially helped launch the health analytics practice, and then took on a broader role as the life science and healthcare consulting leader nationally. And now, over the past few months, I have the privilege of leading our AI strategy practice as well, and that's across all industries. And what I love most about my work is it's truly at the intersection where it's about science, impact, and just broader systems as well. So that's how my path has actually evolved over time.
Oh, that's incredible. And thank you for sharing that. Because a lot of times I think we think of and it's not wrong to have a traditional career, but we always start off with something. And it's kind of funny how life can just lead you to where you're meant to be, or where you can bring the expertise or that curiosity or that passion. So I love how your journey kind of evolved to where you are today. And you're in a space, AI, where a lot of people are kind of confused, don't know what to expect. It's exciting, right? And how you said that, although a lot of your experience is in healthcare, right now you lead more in a general sense. And so I thought today let's kind of start like, how we kind of suggested together that we'd start on a more broad sense of AI and more at an organizational level. And then we'll hone in onto the healthcare aspects because that is what our passion is and where we want to, be able to have that change. So more at an organizational level in a general sense. So all industries, not just healthcare specific. When it comes to AI, what are some trends or patterns that you're seeing, whether it is from, more high level organizational, where you're seeing that there are some challenges, some difficulties, or some excitement as well that you've seen a lot of uptake in? So I'll kind of open the door or open the floor to you to kind of take us in that conversation however you wish, in terms of an openness of AI, organizations, and industry, not non-industry specific.
Yeah, so Fahreen, this is a quite important question. I think the timing of it is extremely appropriate because everyone is dealing with AI in some manner, right? It's one of the few kind of technologies where it's been quite mainstream. Everyone talks about, everyone kind of uses it, and organizations are really trying to figure out, how to harness the power of AI. So everyone's, tinkering or experimenting with it in kind of different magnitudes. But the biggest mistake I see right now is that most organizations are reacting to AI. They're not transforming with it. We always hear the idea around let's execute use cases. And we've been doing this for a number of years, right? And the reality is use cases could be kind of the right path, but when you're chasing isolated use cases instead of asking the bigger question around, are we building our business or our organization differently as a result of AI? Or put it differently, if we were building our business from scratch today, what would it look like if AI were native from day one? And that's a fundamental shift in the way that we think about AI because it's going from doing AI through, different use cases to really being AI enabled. And I think that's where a lot of the friction is right now. And I think that's where organizationally we can actually think of very differently around how we can actually be, quite proactive. And there's obviously a number of steps, leaders can take just around it, but that's what proactive transformation looks like, where you're able to move at a scale and speed with AI versus actually just reacting to it.
Okay, no, that's a great perspective. And so, kind of building off of that, do you think, because how you mentioned, a lot of organizations, regardless of industry, are reactive as opposed to proactive? Do you think it's understanding what they value? So, whatever return on investment, despite what industry it may be, and then for them to work backwards and reverse engineer where AI can help us, is that a way that organizations can become more proactive? Or how would you recommend for anyone listening, how they can do that, where they can change that shift from reactive to proactive? Is it value based? Any recommendations or thoughts on that?
Yeah, so it's definitely value based. So typically, when an organization is thinking about AI, they would say, okay, let's think about what our AI strategy is, right? Like, let's think about how do we inject AI into the right places, and that's thinking about it the wrong way. You're strategizing for AI, not for how AI is going to disrupt your business, as opposed to strategizing to do AI, which is a little bit different. And the way that you think about it is you map your domains of value, where intelligence can actually create leverage across your businesses, right? So, in a healthcare organization, you may end up saying there's, clearly areas where you can actually gain more value than others. Typically people start to go towards back office, whether it's, finance, HR, IT, where there's a lot of manual type of labor, and AI can actually help um, accelerate the speed and actually, increase capacity for a lot of different individuals, or I should say a lot of different departments. Similarly, for a pharmaceutical client, that might be, medical information, that could be regulatory affairs, that could be just patient onboarding. And once you kind of understand which area of my organization I can actually create a lot of value, then you look at one layer underneath that. How do we look at the processes that create the most friction to get that value, and then redesign them around how AI can actually help? And that's when you architect your business, very differently. That's how you end up, going after proactive transformation. And that's what leaders can do. And there's, just very recently, I ended up having a dialogue with a leadership team at an organization and I talked to them around what could they do, right? First of all, you need the right leader with the mandate, who's going to be accountable for connecting the business, the data, and the risk just to be able to kind of transform around it. And then you launch the transformation in one part of the business, create the right foundation, and then try to execute the right kind of connected use cases, not isolated use cases, to be able to enable the transformation. And that's when I think organizations are actually going to become different because of AI, as opposed to kind of doing, onesie twosies across the landscape.
Oh, that's amazing. And building off of that, so today earlier there was a seminar that Deloitte held, and I attended that. And Dr. Devin Singh, he's a physician, emergency room physician at Sick Kids, and he'd said something similar to you, where when it comes to implementing that, so you can do all the work that to determine this is where AI can, and like you said, to not just try to put band-aids and figure out where you can just solely apply AI, but where it makes sense and there's a fit in all of that. But he said when it comes to implementing, sometimes you don't have the runway. And so he's like, can you actually land the plane? And I think that's where you mentioned where you need to have the processes and the policies in place, because you can have the most perfect product. And being on my side, on the vendor side, we can have the perfect product. And sometimes, there are things out of our control. Our nurses are unionized, but our physicians are contractors. So when it comes to phone devices, physicians can use theirs. Nurses, there's a bit more that you have to dabble into. And so that in itself is not being able to land the plane because you don't have the runway for all your respective clinicians. So I really appreciate you kind of sharing that. Now, kind of taking it an extra layer. So we spoke more about it on an organizational level. The next level I want to take it to is individual. A lot of times when it comes to AI, there's fear of losing jobs. Now, being realistic, when it comes to agentic AI, right? So AI agents, we are seeing that at least in the healthcare space, you can use an AI agent to build, in terms of scheduling and all of that. So that does remove someone's job. We're seeing that more admin jobs. There's, replacement by AI. So from your perspective, do you agree with that statement that AI will replace jobs? I think on the other side that it can also augment when it comes to our clinicians and other fields, but wanted to get your thoughts on that. And so I'll pause there. I'll let you answer what you think of that.
Yeah, interestingly enough, I was just on a panel called "The Next Great Big Ideas," and one of the questions I was asked was around what what creates optimism for me and what creates a pause. What creates optimism is I'm starting to see technology in the landscape moving at such a rapid pace, so the opportunities are immense, and that's always great to see, from my perspective. Um, what gave me pause is a question that you just asked in terms of will AI replace jobs? And that's the one debate that we always grapple with in terms of will AI replace jobs or is AI going to create jobs? And the answer is really both. Uh, it will replace jobs and it will create jobs. But the reason it gives me a little bit of a pause is because I think the replacing of jobs will happen faster than we can reskill for jobs. And I think that is a conundrum that we're going to face, which is going to be different from other technology revolutions that we've had, whether it's the industrial revolution or the information revolution. Because the reality is, if we're replacing jobs fast, replacing humans, I should say faster, with machines, and it'll take time for humans to reskill, um, for new jobs, there's going to be a little bit of a drought period and a drought period which is going to kind of test our mettle, as a country or as a, global enterprise, whatever we want to call it. And in terms of how we're going to manage that, because that acceleration going from the replacement to the reskilling is where it's going to create some fragility in our economy. But I do think it's going to be both for sure.
And building off of that, so as an individual, do you think it's our responsibility to make sure we are AI literate? So I think twofold. So for myself and my organization, there is training. We do pilots with Copilot, all of that, and then once they decided to move ahead, then you're given training and all of that. But as an individual, so I am not an engineer by background. I'm more on the client-facing side, whether it's customer success, implementation. But I would do on the side, I will attend a seminar on creating your own AI agent. So where we were taught, just kind of for fun, how to create your own AI agent, that every morning, WhatsApp, I'll get a message on what the weather is in my area. Now that's something very simple, but I did it to keep myself up to date. So when I go into, rooms or conversations or tables, I can hold my own. But that being said, in terms of making sure that I can keep up to pace within my respective role, because like you said, it can be replaced, but how do I keep myself still relevant and still able to evolve and still contribute, so that I don't become, a victim to that? Or so just thoughts on that, where the dance between your organization, right? We said organizational readiness, where they train you, but also on your own to take that onus, but also having the AI or the literacy to know that I should do this for myself. So I know that's a lot to combine, but I'll kind of hand it over to you to kind of break it piece by piece on how you see fit, on how individuals can navigate that.
Yeah, it's an important question, right? Because we talk about AI literacy a lot, but I think it's important to be able to break it down. Um, AI literacy today is what digital literacy was 30 years ago, except the pace is, much faster, and the consequences, in my opinion, are actually much bigger as well. Because at the individual level, literacy isn't about being a coder or figuring out how do you actually build all the different tools. It's always great to end up having it, but it's really about fluency and the ability to understand, how does AI work? What can it do? What can it not do? How do we challenge it? That's where literacy really kind of comes in. Great example is imagine having a car. You don't need to know how to build a car, but you definitely need to know how to drive it safely. Much like agents, you don't need to know how to build an agent, um, but you need to know how to use it and actually how to navigate it properly. And, some of our teams at, Deloitte have built, some great Gen AI tools that, summarize, documents or, build client briefings overnight. And, these are tools that can save hundreds of hours a year. Uh, but the people thriving in this environment aren't necessarily data scientists. It's the ones who ask, better questions as a result of AI. And I think that's where our leadership will really start to change. So that's at an individual level. um, Organizationally, I think it becomes equally as important because literacy at an individual level rolling up to an organization means a big culture change. We've created, AI sandboxes for clients. We have, created safe spaces where, teams can experiment with these type of generative models. Um, this is how you end up creating a culture that embraces AI, because then you're actually taking all of these kind of tools and breaking down into, plain language and improving, the accessibility of what this actually means. And that's to me literacy in action. And those are the kind of steps I think that we need to take, kind of connecting back to your previous question in terms of how do we reskill ourselves for, new jobs that's going to arise as a result of AI. It's going to be done through literacy and being able to create an exposure that allows us to embrace these type of jobs versus shunning ourselves away from it because it looks like a black box.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you kind of, taking it both levels. Kind of building off of that, this might be more of a personal question, but for yourself, how do you keep up to date with the various AI changes? I know you're in the space, so you may be more able to more quickly digest or more readily available. So for a lay person, because right now, because AI is more common, there's a lot of information, a lot of noise. So how do you decipher what is more reliable, what is not, what is actually true? So for the audience, are there certain tools or things that you do for yourself that keep you up to date so that a lay person is also able to do the same for themselves, and so that they can keep up, above the curve, and be able to make sure that they're not caught in it, and then afterwards regret it, right? So what are some personal things that you do that allows you to be effective in the way that you are?
Yeah, that's a good question, right? Because sometimes I grapple with this myself because from any topic that I've ever delved into, nothing has changed faster than AI. Sometimes when you try to keep up with, one aspect of AI, it quickly changes. And I think the honest answer is you really can't keep up with AI. You kind of live inside, um, you live inside a world where you're constantly embracing AI and just keeping in touch with, different aspects of it. So it could be through dialogue, it could be through, hands-on, hands-on experimentation. It could be, um, it could be going to seminars, whatever it is, right? Because pace is just too fast for any single person to master it. So you have to design your environment to just learn continuously. And for me, I guess as a mix of conversation, I have the privilege in my position to speak with a lot of great AI leaders. Um, it's a mix of creation as well. I I tend to get sometimes hands on with some of these tools and just kind of learn exactly how it works. Um, and it just, matter of curation as well, right? You kind of curate the kind of different topics that you're interested in as a result of AI. And what I mean by that is whether it's, delving into, podcast or different articles that I end up reading, um, going to, conferences, whatever it is, just to be able to give me an applied perspective around what's happening and not just some of the things that we, read in headlines. So those are the ways that I tackle it. And if someone was asking me, and some people have asked me this in terms of, what should they do, especially if they don't have any sort of background in I just basically say, don't try to track everything. Try to just immerse yourself continuously. um, it's evolving too fast just to be able to learn alone. Reach out to, different leaders, forums, whatever it is. So this way you're not in catch up mode where you're like, okay, now I'm ready. You're just continuously immersed in it. And I think that's one of the ways that you can scale the knowledge pretty quickly.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. And shout out to podcasts. Yep. So, yeah, like you said, there's so many channels, and I appreciate you kind of walking through all of that, whether it's podcasts, whether it's conferences, seminars, articles, you name it. I think, like you said, still being relevant and asking questions. I've learned that too, even with podcasting. You will never have the answer until you ask. And it helps that in not having, feeling that, okay, this question may be silly. It doesn't matter. There's no question that's silly. The worst that can happen, someone will not answer it, and then you'll find it somewhere else. So I think I appreciate you sharing the various channels and always being curious, right? The more you ask, the more you learn, and you'll be able to carry yourself, or even doing things on the side to, like I said, to be an AI, build an AI agent to tell you the weather every morning. So
Right.
appreciate you sharing that. Building off of that, kind of gearing back more specific into healthcare. So I know how we spoke about digital literacy, more AI literacy. Now, another big piece is health literacy. Now, health literacy is quite determinant on social determinants of health. So your socioeconomic status, your education, your employment, all of that can lead to that. Now, between myself and my sister, I would say we're about the same socioeconomic status. She's a lawyer. I'm more on the healthcare side. I'd been injured once and I went to get my x-ray and ultrasound. And I asked them, so this is years ago, so I'm kind of dating myself now, but I asked them for copies of my x-ray and ultrasound. And I had to pay $10 for a CD. They don't have CDs anymore, but I had to pay for it. So that way I could keep track. So I went to my family physician, sports physician, physiatrist, you name it, chiropractor. So I had it with me. When I came home, she told me I would not have known to ask for that. Right. And so that being said, that shows you that even socioeconomic status alone is not enough to bridge the gap of health literacy. So now with that gap of health literacy, we also have AI literacy. For those that have lower socioeconomic status, do you think that that gap is going to become bigger for that respective population? Or what are your thoughts on that? Or maybe the opposite. What do you think of that?
Yeah, it's a very important question, right? Because this is a topic sometimes we grapple with, where for patients, AI is obviously creating new possibilities for proactive and personalized care. And, we're supporting a lot of programs that use, AI-driven remote monitoring for, diseases like multiple sclerosis, right? Where we're combining, wearable data and clinical data to flag early signs of progression, or doing anything that we can to be much more proactive around deterioration, where you can actually help clinicians intervene early. So those kind of things where you would assume that it actually bridges the gap because remote monitoring can be actually deployed in um, in rural communities or underserved communities in general. Um, but the hard truth, as you called it, is AI can just as easily widen inequity if we're not intentional, because access to AI is contingent on a few different things. Um, the AI literacy and health literacy, as you mentioned, but also around like connectivity. We talk about 5G quite a bit, socioeconomic factors, like you called it. Um, these all matter, right? Because a family without, broadband internet can't benefit from virtual diagnostics. Similarly, like an immigrant kind of coming here who have challenges speaking English fluently, may get lower quality results from an AI chatbot, which is trained on English data sets. And these are real issues, right? Because AI can widen the gap. It can potentially also bridge the gap as well, because a lot of times when we say, well, how do we close some of those gaps? Some people still, go back to AI to say, well, there's AI translation services that can actually help kind of close the gap as well. So sometimes AI becomes a problem and it also becomes a solution. So this is why it really depends on the design and the intent of the solution that you're creating, because if we train AI on diverse data, or we provide access to tools that can actually help bridge some of the socioeconomic kind of challenges and embed it within the systems, it can be a bridge instead of actually widening the gap. And I think that's where we need to be able to direct resources where we see these challenges, because the reality is technology itself is not biased. Um, it's how we use the technology and train the technology that creates the bias. And so we need to be able to spot out what the biases are and be able to solve for it. And that's how we can continue innovating in the space as well. And just making sure that we're just making healthcare more equitable in these challenging areas.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you kind of walking through that. And the reality of it, right, is as much as we grow, there are some certain gaps that can be widened with AI being present. That being said, a couple of weeks ago, I was on a panel with the AI Collective, and something we were talking about. So, ChatGPT, your data is not safe, but let's say you get your blood test and you don't understand it, and you put it into ChatGPT, and so I'm low in iron, so what does that mean for me? What I should do other than supplements, what I can eat, all of that. What are your thoughts on both clinicians and patients with their AI literacy to just be able to navigate the basics? And even though so there's also cybersecurity there too, right? Where I'm putting in my health data into an open AI source, which is probably not the smartest, but I want to understand it. So if my hands are tied where I only have this resource, it is free, and I don't understand what my results are telling me, what are your thoughts on that fine balance of that? Does it make sense for our patients to be doing that, even though it may not be safe in terms of their data, with our clinicians too, where the new tools medical AI scribes is quite big now, but new tools will come in, but to be able to do the basics, if we don't consider, like you said, bandwidth and all of that are important. Just wanted to get your thoughts on that piece, as an example.
Yeah, it's a good question, because there's a lot of things that you're touching on right now. There's cyber risk, there's privacy, there's regulations, and ultimately around trust as well. Um, and we know the danger itself is in AI. It's where, how it's used, I should say first, where the data goes, who controls it. Those are important elements. And as mentioned, ChatGPT or any large language model, they weren't built for regulated data. They were built for all kinds of data, right? So when you enter patient or identifiable information, that data can technically um, go through all the different global servers outside Canadian jurisdiction, potentially breaching some of our privacy kind of laws as well. Even if the data is anonymized, um, model training can actually have residual traces that risk re-identification. Like a lot of us sometimes think, okay, maybe I don't put my name or my drug or whatever it is, and I'll just put, I don't know, XXX or AAA or whatever it is, or blank, so that it seems masked. But the reality is these AI models can look at the context and be able to tell what it is. So that's not true de-identification, because it's so easy to re-identify. So to me, the rule is simple when it comes to openly accessible kind of platforms like ChatGPT. You should never feed live patient or proprietary data into these platforms. But some of these platforms are trained in to be, closed platforms and put in organizations that have the security and the wrapper around it. So now you're actually able to feed in your patient data, or for us as an organization at Deloitte, where we can feed in client data or anything along that because it's housed on um, our servers or access to our portion of our cloud servers as well. And I think that's going to be quite important because it doesn't mean that we can't use the technology safely. The shift we're seeing and we're also helping clients make is towards privately governed sovereign AI environments, and that's going to be quite important because that provides the security that we need, right? So my advice to anyone kind of navigating this, especially whether you're an individual or an organization, is segregation of the environment is quite important. you know uh, when you're experimenting with things or entering your data, just making sure that it's separate from kind of global servers that anyone can actually access. So that's going to be one key one. Data governance is also, as important. Make sure you have explicit, consent and, data lineage tracking and, cyber hygiene before deploying AI. As an individual, knowing whatever you're entering your information to also has those same data governance kind of policies, I think is going to be quite important. And then the last one I was going to say is also understanding which environment you're putting it into. A big part of, today we're talking about is sovereignty just in Canada. And that basically means that we probably are going to trust to put our data in Canadian environments where Canadian servers and infrastructure is there versus, one that is leaving our country. And I think that's where, when we think about these kind of things, we're actually making the right type of trade-offs because innovation and privacy aren't trade-offs necessarily. They're kind of codependencies. And whether you're an organization or you're an individual, getting it right is when you kind of understand these different layers and just around how you navigate it so that you can ensure that you're accessing a trusted system.
No, I appreciate that. And there's a lot of information there. So just kind of closing the loop there. As a layperson, how would I know that I'm touching all? So ChatGPT is the free version is not the best idea for me to put my blood test into there to understand what the results mean. So as a layperson, how would I know that? Or what are some key points or just tidbits that the audience or nuggets the audience can use? Because you mentioned a lot of things, but I think that comes also with understanding and literacy to be like, hey, this makes sense. These are Canadian servers. This is safe for me. So if there's anything you could just share with the audience so that a lay person can know, hey, this isn't the best idea for me, and this may be.
Right. So I think the first thing is when it comes to your private healthcare data, so things that you would not want to share with anyone and making sure it doesn't get in the wrong hands, it shouldn't ever go on a um, ChatGPT type of environment, um, because technically that could be potentially accessible. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't ask questions about your disease. It's just basically saying you don't want to copy your whole chart and paste it into a chat. It's being thoughtful just around how do I take elements of that and ask the right questions to ChatGPT where there isn't a danger to my identity, my health, my kind of data that goes into it. The If you do want to actually access those type of platforms and tools, that's where you would want to end up seeing what are your hospitals, healthcare institutions, or looking for technologies and tools that can provide the privacy and the security. And those are going to be good questions that you end up basically asking around it. And there's a lot of information when you access the tools that tells you exactly if it's has Canadian residency rules, how they would end up using the data. And every single tool has an option to say, can your data be used for training in the models, even if it's anonymized, and you have an ability to toggle back and forth around it. Like anyone who's listening to this, I would say, ChatGPT, Copilot, Claude, whatever it is, if you go to your privacy settings, you'll end up seeing your data is right now being used for retraining. You can easily toggle it off, especially if you're concerned about it. But in a general rule, I wouldn't just put all your data just on these type of servers. You want to make sure you're accessing platforms that is provided by healthcare institutions most of the time.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you kind of walking through that just to explain in layperson's terms. Now, building off of what you said, like you mentioned, when it comes to cyber attacks, your patient, so PHI, patient health data or information, sorry, there's malicious intent, right? So if I'm able to collect your data as, whether it's insurance company or what have you, if I know that this X person has X, Y, and Z disease and they'll need a lot of medication or what have you, that can create some issues, right? Because right now you just all contribute to a pot, your diseases or conditions are not known. If that data becomes available, there can be some issues there. I think in the 1980s, also with the AIDS epidemic, right, where data was more PHI and all the acts to protect that weren't as well known, and individuals that did have AIDS, when it came to insurance companies or have you, if they had access to that, it could cause some issues. And so, just building off of what Shanil was saying, kind of highlighting that having that fine balance with knowledge and your data. So asking ChatGPT to explain, like, I have low iron, what does that mean, as opposed to putting in my full report where they can access even other aspects, other areas that I may be lacking or what have you. They don't need to know that, but what specifically. So just wanted to highlight that. Now, kind of building off of that point I just mentioned, and we dabbled into this a little bit about cybersecurity. Now, in the past couple of years, some of our hospitals have had code grays, so cyber attacks. So whether it's Sick Kids, Michael Garron Hospital, they've had code grays. Now, from your perspective, being in the consulting space, what are your thoughts on that in terms of cybersecurity? How do we strengthen that? A lot of our hospitals have legacy systems, so it's very easy to poke a hole in them and then kind of, dabble it that way or get into it that way. So just wanted your thoughts on that overall and what organizations can do to be better at cybersecurity.
Yeah, it's a great question, right? Because a lot of times we talk about the excitement around AI and what AI can end up doing, especially in terms of the optimism that we end up having in terms of the applications that can be applied within within a hospital environment in this case as well. Um, but as as we start to advance technologies that can provide a lot of benefits, we're also advancing technology that can create threats and risks. So as AI is increasing, cyber attacks are increasing as well. That's a huge issue. It's a patient safety issue, not just an IT issue, because when a hospital is hit with ransomware or anything along those lines, um, the whole system shuts down. And if it shuts down, surgeries are delayed, diagnostics are frozen, patients are diverted. Um, and you gave a couple of different examples, right, where hospitals have been, hit with a ransomware attack and that locked down critical systems for weeks, right? And the hospitals themselves, handled it remarkably well, but exposed just how vulnerable those legacy infrastructure can be, because most hospitals run on a patchwork of old and new systems. You may end up having a great health information system like an electronic health record system that you just put in, but you may end up having an old lab system or imaging server um, that are kind of pieced together based on old technology. And many of them, it's not because the hospitals themselves are not putting enough investment into it. It just, a lot of times, it can't easily be updated. It can't be easily encrypted. And it takes a lot of time to actually think about how do you actually um, transform these systems. But all of these kind of challenges creates, hundreds, if not thousands of entry points for attackers. So the question isn't if healthcare organizations will be targeted, and as we see, it's how fast can we actually strengthen our defenses while modernizing the systems? Because sure, you can't modernize a system um, within a few weeks, but you can kind of take a parallel track around it. So, which is why a lot of times we advise organizations to do different things. First of all, um, we call it different things. I think we call it zero trust. We've also called it no trust architecture, where, hospitals can't rely on, perimeter security anymore. Where, every device, user connection, must be authenticated at every time. We see that with our phones with, multi-factor authentication. And when we've deployed in our cyber solutions, in hospitals and government entities, the biggest shift was making sure that the culture was able to adapt to it as much as, technology. Because if we're not adopting some of those practices like multi-factor authentication, this is going to end up creating potential breach as well. So I think that's going to be, one key part. Second is, just around the modernization. So um, given a lot of these systems are kind of patchwork of and a mix of old and new kind of technology, gradually migrating these type of legacy system to secure cloud environments is going to dramatically limit the radius of the attack. And it's hard work. I'm not going to end up making it sound like a small work, but it's a necessary piece of work. So the how you actually plan for that modernization is going to be critical, because vulnerability will be there and continue to be there, while that happens. And the last one, kind of touching on my last point, is given the cost of this could be also quite high, and every hospital or government entity or any other organization is all vulnerable to this. You don't have to do it alone. You know, we need more kind of regional and shared infrastructure models, so that, when one institution, um, I should say, when several institutions um, contribute to this infrastructure, they all benefit together, because, one institution can detect an attack patterns, others are warned within hours. This is where partnerships can actually come in. And I think that's just another way that we can actually address this. And much like people are going to be investing in AI, it's equally as important, if not more important, to invest in your cyber response as well.
Yeah, no, I appreciate going through that detailed explanation and in some of the options that organizations may have, or even just understanding what that meant. And how you said just having a shared infrastructure. I think just in general, a lot of times the healthcare, the data is in silos, but sometimes we also run in silos. Like we've seen a lot of EPIC, so electronic medical record implementations, and hospitals will be on the same street. And it's like, why not learn from one another and build that so you have lessons learned and you don't repeat the same mistakes. So I think to your point, not always working in silos. I think it's important to have that shared knowledge and infrastructure or what have you. And that being said, when cyber attacks do happen, the liability or it's more lean towards the vendor side, that they should be the ones accountable for it. I believe it should be shared accountability because we're all contributing, but a lot of the time, or legality, the accountability is more on the vendor side. In your opinion, what do you think of that?
In terms of who's actually liable for this?
Yeah, in terms of accountability, if that was to happen, do you think who should be responsible? Should it be the vendor? Because that is who is usually responsible for it, that the accountability, if the system goes down, that the vendor is responsible. But should it not be a shared responsibility? Because you could integrate to systems that are older. So just understanding that. And the reason I put this question on the table is because that also impacts the innovation within Canada. And I'll just share an example and then I'll hand it back to you, Shanil, is that one of the companies I work at, OnCall, is
Right.
a Canadian company, Toronto, homegrown, everything. We got acquired by an American company. Now, that being said, for our Canadian clients, we have Canadian servers. For American, we have American servers. But our IP, our intellectual property now is American. So we're losing a lot of our innovation to our neighbors. And so how do we have that environment within Canada where, some of the policies and what have you may not be as favorable for us? So that's kind of where that question stems. So I know that's a lot I threw at you, but I'll let you navigate that how you so wish and what your thoughts are when I kind of share that with you.
Yeah, who is liable? I think it's a tough question. Um, because in all honesty, in most cases, everyone is liable, and at the same time, no one is liable. And what I mean by that is, when a hospital is breached, the blame is often on IT or the vendors, IT works with. But the truth is, cybersecurity is now a board level, a clinical level, and a vendor issue. So you can't just blame IT. When it comes down to it, and it gets very, very tricky because of the impact. Because if you think about it, if a patient is harmed because of a medical error, there are clear accountability frameworks, right? Um, but if a patient is harmed because their surgery was delayed due to ransomware, that accountability is murky, right? Because the reality is, vendors, sell systems, and sometimes they actually create like a connection, which, creates some, um, patchwork just around this in some kind of cases or completely modernize the system. But, truthfully speaking, a lot of organizations and boards underfund cyber because it's seen as overhead, um, and not patient safety. And that's changing, quite rapidly. But this becomes a fundamental issue as well, right? Because until you have a cyber attack, you realize, shoot, we should have actually had kind of the protocols, the principles, the systems in place to address it. But before that, it is seen as overhead, kind of like insurance, or what we've seen with um, you know uh, pandemic teams as well, which is some of the issues that we actually ran into. Um, and regulators are also, partly liable as well because they set privacy standards, but not resilience standards, right? So when something goes wrong, the liability gets diffused quite quickly, and that's exactly why attackers target healthcare. Um, but if we're serious about fixing the issue, liability has to become shared because, of course, vendors has to be accountable for maintaining security patches. But boards must treat cyber as a core enterprise risk, like infection control. Using that example again, regulators must mandate minimum kind of resilience standards for critical infrastructure, and we should do that across the board. And that's where we have a chain of shared accountability where, sure, there might not be a clear owner in terms of when a ransom attack actually happens, or ransomware happens, but you have a clear owners in different parts of the chain. And until we define accountability across that chain, um, it's going to end up creating some challenges, for cyber attacks.
Yeah, no, I appreciate kind of walking and kind of giving a good lay of the land on all aspects, like you said, patient safety. So not just looking at it from one side. So yeah, so I appreciate you going through that because me being on the vendor side, I pick up on that piece, but I loved how you made like a full circle of it and you kind of showed the bigger picture. So appreciate that. I'm just going to tie into the last question I had for you that I alluded to a little bit earlier. So in terms of our innovation environment within Canada in the healthcare ecosystem, is not as great. And the reason I say this, we use Epic. In the States, they use Epic as well. They have modules that are AI modules. But because of some of the limitations we have in our ecosystem, we are not able to use those modules. And so, like I said, a lot of our IP, we're losing our intellectual property, we are losing to the States. And so, in your opinion, what needs to be done so that we have an environment within Canada, within healthcare, to have the environment of innovation, to have homegrown technologies that stay in Canada? Because it's also a fine dance between capitalism, right? It's a larger market in the States. You're going to make more money there as well. So just wanted your thoughts on that last piece, on however you want to take us through that.
Yeah, it's a great question, right? Because Canada does get a lot of flack in terms of our ability to innovate within the environment. Um, and it's not been a talent issue. We have world-class talent when it comes to AI. A lot of our godfathers when it comes to AI, like, Jeffrey Hinton and Joshua Bengio, are Canadian, and they're advancing, or they have advanced AI greatly, not just for Canada, but across the globe as well. It's always been in translating that research or AI research applications into innovation, into IP, into scale as well. And I've always been a big critic around our ability to translate this, but I do think we're putting in the right pieces to change that narrative. First of all, the fact that we have, a new minister of AI, I think is a great direction for the country, where you see a leader of at that level being appointed by Prime Minister Carney, I think is big. Evan Solomon is our new minister, and I think that creates a kind of a unified vision in terms of how we bring our investments, our innovation, and our regulations together. I think so that's critical. The second thing that I'm seeing is a lot of great investments. Investment has been a big issue in Canada as well, especially in Canadian companies, but that's why Canadian companies go across the border. But coming back to the government put invested $250 million into Cohere, which is a Canadian company that builds large language models, much like OpenAI, and that's Canadian compute on Canadian infrastructure, uh, optimized for Canadian enterprises and regulations. And I think that's really big. Um, and part of that innovation is also making sure we're able to bridge the gap between research and application that can be commercialized. And so I'm very optimistic, especially in healthcare, what we're seeing with pharma and biotech partnering with the vectors and the mailers of the world to create real commercial applications around it. And that's how innovation actually can be created. So I'm very optimistic with some of the signals that I'm seeing this year in terms of what we're doing to actually advance it. And I think, at the heart of this is sovereignty. We understand um, we need to be able to thrive in the space as Canada and not be able to just be dependent on other countries and advancing this as well. Because as we've seen with trade, it's it's hard to just create a dependency on others. And when that partnership kind of goes away, we create a very fragile system. And if AI is our future, we need to be able to harness the power now.
No, I think it's beautiful how you mentioned that's not a lack of talent and how like now with the political, ecosystem that's more enabling that funding. A lot of times throughout our session today, you mentioned sovereignty. Do you mind just explaining to the audience because you've used it quite a few times what you mean when you say that and when you utilize that term quite a bit, especially when it comes to AI in Canada?
Yeah, and one of the reasons that I use this is because unfortunately it's become a huge um, political issue for us. And sovereignty really kind of comes down to um, being self-sufficient. Um, and it originally didn't start with our trade talks. It started with energy and resources as well. For quite a few years. But in simple terms, it means self-sufficiency. It means control. Accountability just over your resources as well. And when we talk about AI, or sometimes you may hear data sovereignty, we're asking, where does our data live? Who's accountable for it? Who owns the infrastructure? Who sets the rules? Whose laws are we going to actually, abide by? And sovereignty, when it comes to AI, it's about saying, Canadian data should stay in Canada, trained on Canadian models, governed by Canadian standards. And that's why I think it's become a national pride, as a result, because it creates protection for our Canadian citizens. And if we lose control of that sovereignty, we lose control of our decisions. And I think that's where we need to uh, change the dialogue to be able to um, create, more investments, more movement um, around that control and around the trust of these applications and data in Canada.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you explaining that because I noticed that was one theme that was reoccurring in your responses. So I wanted to let me ask you explain it to the audience what you mean when you say that. So thank you for that. Before I wrap us up, is there anything you wanted to share, Shanil, that we may have missed on, or that you want to share with the audience before we fully wrap up for our episode?
First of all, thanks for having me, and this has been, obviously just a, fantastic conversation. I think you're touching on a lot of topics that I think are critical, and these are the kind of conversations that we need to have because, as I talked about AI literacy earlier, this is going to be crucial to be able to be immersed in these type of dialogues. The one thing that I will also mention is this might be more for organizations, thinking about AI in general. Um, I think right now, one of the great things that we're having globally is everyone has access to the same AI tools, whether ChatGPT, Copilot, Claude, whatever you want to use. But if everyone has access to the same AI tools, then the differentiator will never be the algorithm. It's going to be our ambition in terms of how we apply it. And I fundamentally believe that organizations or individuals who are kind of even coming to the workforce who want to differentiate themselves, they need to be thinking about how do they reimagine their organization, their career as a result of AI. And this way, I I actually think that we're going to fundamentally kind of change some of the conversations we're having because right now we talk about AI to make us faster, more efficient. But I do think that AI can actually make our economy much better. But it does take a lot of courage to be able to do that. So I just wanted to touch on that and leave you with that.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Shanil, for taking the time to speak with us. You shared so many nuggets, starting from the organizational level to individual, AI literacy, health literacy, even cybersecurity, how to navigate that as an individual, as a patient, as an organization, and just kind of wrapping up with the importance of how we'll all have the same tools, right? So you may all have the same tools in your toolbox. How you navigate those tools and how you use them ultimately will kind of help you kind of move ahead as we evolve with AI. So thank you so much once again, Shanil, for taking the time. Had a wonderful conversation. So thank you again.
Thanks. Thank you very much.